So now that you know a little bit about me, I'm going to show you some of my biggest influences. My favorite cartoonist as a child was John Severin. He did a lot of Western and war comics, some fantasy work, but my favorite work of his was for the magazine Cracked. He was the go-to artist for everything. This is one of his drawings for the movie Beetlejuice. The thing I really like about him is that he adds so much personality to even parody. So he worked in a lot of different styles. This is actually one of his more simplistic styles. Is very good at cross-hatching and building up texture. He's great with acting. His characters are always acting. They're bouncy. The lettering is really nice. The line weight, just with the atmospheric perspective, seeing how this character really comes forward with all that cross-hatching behind him. I'm going to show you another style of his. You can see in both of these examples just how talented John Severin was. Here, he's doing a parody of a TV show about the wild world of sports, but everybody that he treats in it is this caricature, but the caricatures are very accurate. Even though that they're, accurate, they're not disturbing, at least in my opinion. Like when I look at them, they read as both the person that he's caricaturizing, but also they read as masterful cartooning. There's just so much depth. Right here is a really good example of these two characters talking. The silhouette in back of these characters really creates a lot of space in just that one panel. You can tell that sometimes he's definitely using photo reference when the faces are really accurate, but then in other panels where he draws those same characters, like the panel before, he masterfully creates that character, or that he creates that person as a cartoon character. So they read both as a cartoon character and as a very specific character. And not very many cartoonists, in my experience, can do that well. And as a child, it was pretty captivating. He would include caricatures of himself in the crowd. And when I discovered that he did that, it really made everything feel even more human, knowing that he was actively putting himself into his work. This is one of my favorite parody strips of his because I was growing up at the time when Beetlejuice was actually in theaters. So I had watched the movie, but then I was able to read the parody of it and able to compare and contrast them in my mind. He does a lot of funny things with his signature, which I always think is really interesting. Like here he has his name sort of emerging from this puddle. So all of the characters in Beetlejuice are pretty famous actors. So when you look at his parody, you can see the characters as both the cartoon characters that he created, but also as the actors themselves. Again, it's very masterfully done. I really like this scene here where Beetlejuice is standing and talking to the couple that recently died. Just the amount of space that is created on his modeled town set is really nice. He does a lot of nice things with cross-hatching in the distance. Even as a child, I realized that he was able to draw in the most simple way, and also he was able to parody cartoonists. So one of my favorite things about John Severin is his ability to work in different styles. In my own work, I really find it important to be able to be less about style and more about being stylish. So being able to adapt to different drawing styles is a really handy trait to have, and he has it in spades. I'm also inspired just by his ink work. His ability to be adaptive with ink was really inspiring to me as a kid. It installed in me the love of ink, and that's why I kept working with it for many years. So the next cartoonist that was incredibly inspiring to me was Bill Watterson and his comic strip Calvin and Hobbes. It's probably, at least within Western comics, one of the most important recent additions to the canon. So one of my favorite things about Calvin and Hobbes is, if you're unfamiliar with it, it's a story about a young boy and his doll, the tiger, and the world that they imagine, or that he imagines. Sometimes he would imagine himself as this alien explorer named Spaceman Spiff. And it was in these comic strips that he was able to explore distant lands and encounter monster aliens. And as a kid, that was thrilling because there was nothing else like it in the newspaper. One of the things that is most notable, in my opinion, about his work that's different than John Severin is that he used a brush. The lines that he was drawing were all done with a brush. The lines just have this kind of juicy spontaneity to them. Even when things are mechanical, everything kind of has a bounce to it. When he's running, it has a bounce. When he's static and he's just looking over this fence, there's motion in it just by the weight of his father's shoulders and the weight of Calvin on the fence. And this panel right here where Calvin is reading comics with Hobbes. Again, it's such a tiny panel, but there's so much information in it. A lot of atmospheric perspective, just describing the wrinkles in the sheets. I just really love looking at his line work. You can see here, I'm pretty sure that he did use a nib in this cloud behind Spaceman Spiff and underneath the spaceship itself. And I think, again, there aren't very many cartoonists that use all sorts of tools, but he uses both a nib and a brush, but most of this work is done with a brush. So this book is slightly later. Calvin was able to imagine himself as a private detective, as a space explorer, and sometimes he imagined himself as a dinosaur. You never knew what to expect with Calvin and Hobbes. Again, the brushwork is just beautiful. He got better and better throughout the time that he worked on this comic. I was a fan for almost the entire 10 years that it existed. Every time that I saw a Calvin and Hobbes strip, it seemed like it was better than the last. And that's one of my favorite things about being a cartoonist, is that we're kind of learning in public. I can look at my earlier work and I can see how I got better, but I wasn't afraid to be putting myself out there. One of the things that Bill Watterson is most known for is his rain, or at least amongst cartoonists. And this panel here is just fantastic, where he's waiting for the bus with Hobbes. Just the way that he's building up textures here. It's just crosshatching with parallel lines going up and down, but he's building up this tree that's in back of the umbrella. There's some atmospheric perspective there. Just the two of them kind of sandwiched there between the curb and the tree and the rain. So in general, it was Bill Watterson's imagination that made me such a fan of his work, and that's what I tried to put into my own work. So my next influence is just indie comics in general. This book is The Narrative Corpse, came out in the 90s. It was edited and put together, assembled by Bob Sikoryak and Art Spiegelman. This comic is like a chain letter comic where each cartoonist contributed 3 panels and then mailed their panels to a friend. And then that person did 3 panels and then the next person sent it on and on and on, like a chain letter. It's a little bit like a jam comic. But the thing that I found so captivating about this when I was a kid was that I was becoming more familiar with a lot of these cartoonists, and I was sort of in awe that they all seemed to know each other. I could see just by looking at this book that comics was a community. The book itself is quite difficult to read, and it isn't any sort of great literature, but the community is what I was interested in, but also just the smashing of styles together, where one person's style could be put next to somebody else's sense of style, and how sometimes people mimicked each other's style. So it really went all over the place. It's quite a wild ride. And this comic specifically inspired me and some of my friends to create the website, The Infinite Corpse, which actually, this last panel here on the last page is the beginning of the website. I was lucky enough to run into the editors of this book at a convention, and I told them about my idea. They gave me their blessing. When I saw this book and I saw that there was this community, I felt in awe of it, but I also felt quite jealous of it because I wasn't good enough to be included and I was so young. But then with the dawn of the internet and all of a sudden finding myself within this community, I felt that it would be really awesome if it continued online and anyone could be involved in it. If you ever want to visit the website, you can participate in it yourself. Right now we have like 500 artists that are involved. And it actually includes both Art Spiegelman and Bob Sikoryak, so the editors of this book. When I started making comics, it's very easy to become part of the world and the community of comics because it is a very small world. They're publishing their work by themselves without the authority of like somebody giving them permission to do so, and doing wild, crazy things. People are using different types of printing techniques like screen printing or the risograph to come up with crazy color, just like really low budget, hypercolor comics. Everybody is extremely experimental. So as soon as you get into it, you can't help but just be inspired by how everybody is approaching it in their own completely different way. Now that I've shown you some of my influences, in the next lesson, I'm going to show you materials we're going to use for the course.